Beneath the silent peak, at the edge of a Himalayan valley where the mountains whispered old names to the sky and the streams sang over stones like monks at prayer, a boy appeared one pale dawn. He emerged from the forest with the cautious steps of a creature long untethered. His clothes were thin and patched, his feet bare and scarred from the thorns and ice of the paths he had crossed, and his eyes held a silence deeper than the wind that moved across the ridges. No one knew him. No one claimed him. The villagers, cautious as always with strangers, watched him from behind wooden shutters and whispered over cooking pots and fires. A few asked him questions. "Where are you from?" a woman with a woven shawl asked, her voice not unkind. He looked at her, unafraid. "From the forest," he said. "And before that?" she pressed, narrowing her eyes. The boy paused. "I don't remember." That was all. He spoke no more than needed and never asked for anything. When night fell, he curled beneath the wood stack behind the village shrine and slept with his arms wrapped around his knees. Most ignored him, unsure whether he was a ghost, a spirit, or simply a lost child born of the mountains. A few left him scraps of food, which he accepted with a nod and no words. He did not beg. He did not weep. He simply stayed. One man watched closely. Tenzin was an old man who lived above the village, in a small stone hut surrounded by prayer flags that fluttered like colored breath in the wind. Once a wandering monk, he had traveled the lower ranges with nothing but a begging bowl, a thin robe, and silence as his closest companion. He saw the boy and recognized something familiar in him, a stillness that came not from peace, but from surviving long enough to forget what fear is supposed to feel like. On the third night, while frost gathered on their rooftops and the stars trembled like candle flames in a shrine, Tenzin approached the boy without words. He handed him a thick woolen cloak, turned, and walked slowly toward the mountain path without looking back. The boy hesitated, then stood. He followed. He didn't speak, and neither did Tenzin. The hut was modest, a single room with a fire pit in the middle and a bed made of straw and wool. There were no walls of books or shelves of relics, just a wooden prayer wheel by the door and a carved bowl resting quietly on the altar. That night, the boy slept beside the fire while Tenzin sat in meditation, his back straight and his hands resting like stones in his lap. The wind sighed against the walls, but inside there was only breath and warmth. Days passed like fallen leaves on the stream. The boy fetched water from the spring, gathered kindling, and learned to start a fire with flint, tinder, and patience. Tenzin didn't teach with words. He demonstrated. He cooked without rush, cleaned without sighs, and moved through the day like the wind through reeds, present, unseen, undemanding. The boy mirrored him. He stopped flinching when someone reached near. He stopped asking why things happened. He simply did what was needed, when it was needed, without expectation. One evening after their meal of rice, lentils, and wild greens, the boy asked, "Why did you let me follow you?" Tenzin gazed into the flames, his eyes reflecting flickers of orange. "Because you were walking," he said. "That's all." "That is everything." The boy thought on that. He wanted to ask more, but the silence between them felt fuller than any answer could be. So he closed his mouth and listened to the fire crackle, to the breath of the earth. That night he dreamed of clouds sitting low on mountaintops, holding the world like folded hands. The boy rose each morning with the sun, before the birds stirred, before the smoke rose from the village chimneys. His tasks were unspoken but understood. Fill the water jug, sweep the floor, grind the herbs, tend the fire. Tenzin never gave him instructions. The boy simply learned to watch and act. There was a rhythm in the old man's movements, as if he were listening to a deeper drum beat beneath the day. Slowly the boy began to hear it too. He began to sense a pattern in the world around him. He saw how the icicles formed and melted, how the frost on the grass came not with fanfare, but with breathless quiet. He noticed how the deer stepped gently, only when the wind shifted, and how the trees bowed slightly toward the sun, even in the heart of winter. The boy no longer felt like a stranger. He felt like a thread in a great tapestry, even if he could not yet see the whole pattern. One morning Tenzin took him on a long walk. They climbed beyond the tree line, where the air thinned and the clouds hung lower than thought. There, nestled between boulders half buried in time, stood an old stone stupa, simple, weathered, alone. Moss crept up its sides and lichen painted its base in orange and gray, like a monk's robe left in the rain. "No one comes here," said the boy. "They don't need to," Tenzin replied. "What's inside it?" "Nothing. It's empty." "Then why was it built?" "To remind us of that." The boy didn't understand, but he didn't argue. Instead, he circled the stupa 3 times, as he had seen villagers do around shrines, and placed a small pebble at its base. On the way back, he noticed how his shadow stretched ahead of him, and how Tenzin's did not. The sun had shifted. They spent the winter mostly indoors. Snow piled against the walls and silence deepened, thick as wool. The boy learned to sit still for long stretches, not because he was told, but because he found comfort in stillness. He sat beside Tenzin in meditation, sometimes with his eyes closed, sometimes watching the way the smoke curled upward and vanished. Tenzin told him stories then, not written tales, but living ones. "My teacher once said," he murmured one evening as snow whispered against the roof, "that when you see a bowl and love it even when it's empty, you begun to understand life." The boy stared into the bowl between them. "But what if it never fills again?" "Then it is always ready." From that day the boy stopped expecting. He noticed more clearly the shimmer of pine needles after a storm, the way wind touched stone, the long pause before birdsong. He stopped needing the world to explain itself. Instead, he let it unfold. He began to walk alone to the stupa and sit beside it for hours. Sometimes he closed his eyes. Sometimes he watched the clouds drift like thoughts across the sky. But always when he left a small stone behind, a thank you for the emptiness that held him without asking anything in return. Spring came quietly to the mountains, not with a trumpet, but with small awakenings. Tiny green shoots pushed through melting snow. Birds returned one by one, and the river's voice grew louder with each passing day. The boy, now taller and steadier, felt his limbs stretch like branches toward the light. He still did not know his true age, nor did he ask. Time passed, but he no longer counted it. He rose, worked, listened, and sat, just as Tenzin did. One morning, Tenzin asked him to carry the offering bowl down to the village. "Let them fill it," the old man said, "then bring it back untouched." The boy frowned. "We always eat what they give. Today we carry the bowl for their sake, not ours." So the boy walked down the mountain with the bowl cradled in both hands. The villagers had grown used to him now. They no longer called him a spirit or stared with suspicion. They greeted him with quiet nods. One by one, they placed rice, lentils, roots, and dried fruit into the bowl. A child handed him a piece of flatbread with a smile. The boy bowed, thanked them, and climbed back up the winding trail. When he returned, Tenzin took the bowl and looked inside. "They gave from what little they had," said the boy, his voice low with respect. Tenzin smiled. "And so the bowl is full." He walked to the shrine and, without a word, emptied the contents onto a clean cloth. Then he folded the cloth, lifted it into the wind, and let the food scatter into the forest below. Birds came first, then squirrels, and finally a mother fox with two kits. They ate in silence. "Wasn't that wasteful?" the boy asked gently. Tenzin shook his head. "When we ask without needing, we offer others a chance to give. When we receive without keeping, we remind the world that nothing belongs to us, even generosity." The boy sat with that lesson like a stone in his hand, cold at first but warming slowly. Later that week, they gathered fallen branches in the woods when the boy stopped and touched the bark of a dying tree. It leaned toward the path, half uprooted by winter's wind. "Should we help it stand?" he asked. "No," said Tenzin. "It has already begun to return." "To what?" "To what it always was before it became tree." The boy blinked, then touched the wood more gently. "So dying isn't the end?" Tenzin's eyes twinkled. "It's a turning." The boy began to notice more. The bird that sang louder just before it flew away. The flower that bloomed brightest the day before it withered. The way Tenzin's face, though deeply lined, seemed more peaceful with each passing week. The old man moved slower now, and sometimes sat longer without rising. One night the boy asked, "Will you leave soon?" Tenzin didn't answer right away. He lifted the kettle from the fire, poured the tea, and handed the boy a cup. "When a river returns to the sea, is it gone?" "No," the boy whispered. "Then neither am I." The fire cracked. Outside, a single leaf let go from the tree and floated into the darkness. It didn't fall, it danced. Summer warmed the stones and the wind carried the scent of cedar and ash. The boy, no longer a child but not yet a man, rose before the sun to sit in silence. He had learned the names of the birds, the rhythm of the wind, the weight of silence. But more than that, he had learned how little names mattered. He no longer asked what things were. He asked only what they were becoming. Tenzin had grown quieter. He no longer walked down the mountain. His days were filled with stillness. Sometimes he spoke. Often he simply watched the clouds pass by. The boy sat beside him, no longer needing answers. One day as they watched the morning mist lift from the valley, Tenzin said, "It is time." The boy did not ask what he meant. That evening the old man prepared their simple meal, rice, ginger, and wild greens. He lit a single candle, turned the prayer wheel once, and sat. As the night deepened, he said only one thing more. "When I am gone, take the bowl to the peak." The boy nodded, though his chest felt tight. At dawn, Tenzin did not rise. The boy did not cry. He sat beside the old man's body and waited for the sun. Then he dressed him in clean robes, wrapped him in cloth, and built a small pyre as he had seen once, long ago in the lowlands. He did not light it. Instead, he sat beside it for 3 days. On the third morning, as the wind rose and scattered the last petals of summer, he lit the fire. Smoke rose like a prayer with no words. Birds sang. The wind carried the scent of cedar and old ash. The boy bowed deeply, then took the bowl and began to climb. The trail to the peak was long and steep, and the air grew thin. But he did not falter. At the summit, clouds moved like slow rivers, and the sky felt close enough to touch. He sat and placed the bowl before him. For hours he sat, for days. He ate nothing, spoke nothing. And then without sound, a gust of wind lifted the bowl and rolled it gently over the edge. It disappeared into the clouds below. He smiled. He had not come to keep anything. He had come to let it go.